The early October sun crawled up behind the jagged ridges of the western Arizona canyon lands, painting the stratified rock walls in burnt orange and deep crimson. Morning in the desert came with a particular stillness, a quiet so profound it seemed to have physical weight. The temperature, still mercifully cool from the night, would soon give way to the unrelenting heat that made this landscape as punishing as it was beautiful. The tourist adjusted his backpack straps, tightening them against his shoulders with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent decades exploring remote locations. At 47, his weathered face told the story of a man who found peace in solitude and wisdom in natural landscapes. 20 years of vacation time spent hiking through national parks had honed his skills, developing an intuition for terrain and weather that most professional guides would envy. He paused to consult his topographical map, spreading it against a flat rock surface. This wasn't his first solo expedition, but it was his first time in this particular section of the canyon system, a less traveled area that promised the solitude he craved. His colleagues at the accounting firm back in Chicago would never understand this need to disconnect, to test himself against wilderness. They knew him as meticulous, detail-oriented, reliable, the same qualities that made him an exceptional hiker. The morning light caught on his wedding band as he traced the planned route with his finger. 15 years of marriage, and still his wife supported these annual solo journeys, understanding they were what kept him balanced, centered. Their teenage children had inherited his love for the outdoors, though they preferred group camping trips with friends to their father's solitary expeditions. The tourist inhaled deeply, filling his lungs with the crisp desert air tinged with sage and juniper. Something felt different today. Not necessarily wrong, but unusual. The desert songbirds, normally vocal at this hour, seemed subdued. He had expected to see tracks of coyote or deer near the small seasonal stream he'd camped beside, but the earth remained unmarked except for his own footprints. Strange, he murmured to no one, voice swallowed by the vast landscape. He'd developed a habit of talking to himself on these journeys. It kept the isolation at bay. He shouldered his pack again, estimating he had about 6 hours of good hiking before the afternoon heat would force him to seek shelter. The canyon system spread before him like a labyrinth, its winding pathways carved by ancient waters, beckoning with promises of unseen vistas and hidden alcoves. According to his research, this section was rarely visited, too remote for day hikers, too restrictive for off-roaders, and lacking the spectacular formations that drew photographers. The tourist had chosen this route precisely for its obscurity. After spending the better part of 2 decades exploring the more trafficked areas of America's national parks and wilderness areas, he had developed an appetite for the truly untouched. It wasn't just about escaping crowds. It was about finding places where human presence felt novel, where he could imagine himself as an original explorer. The terrain grew more challenging as he descended deeper into the canyon network. What had begun as a well-defined trail gradually dissolved into a rough path marked occasionally by cairns left by previous hikers, likely members of the small, dedicated community of backcountry enthusiasts who shared information about these remote areas through specialized forums and encrypted GPS coordinates. By mid-morning, the canyon walls rose higher around him, narrowing in places to create passages where the sunlight barely penetrated. The temperature remained surprisingly cool in these shadowed corridors, a welcome relief as the day warmed. The silence had deepened too, taking on an almost pressurized quality that made his ears strain for any sound. The tourist paused to drink from his hydration pack, scanning the striated walls around him. Years of geological forces had compressed time itself into these layers, Paleozoic, Mesozoic, Cenozoic eras all stacked neatly like pages in Earth's autobiography. His amateur interest in geology added depth to his appreciation, allowing him to read the landscape like a narrative of planetary evolution. As he continued his descent, the absence of wildlife became increasingly noticeable. No lizards skittering across sun-warmed rocks, no hawks circling overhead. Even the insects seemed scarce. In 20 years of backcountry hiking, he'd never experienced such a profound absence of life in an otherwise habitable environment. A subtle vibration transmitted through the soles of his hiking boots, almost imperceptible, like the distant passage of a freight train felt through bedrock. He froze, senses suddenly heightened. This far from any road or settlement, there shouldn't be mechanical vibrations of any kind. He crouched, placing his palm flat against the ground, confirming the sensation. a regular rhythmic tremor that suggested machinery rather than natural seismic activity. The tourist frowned, his internal map recalibrating. The nearest mining operation should be at least 30 miles northeast. No authorized drilling or extraction was happening in this protected area. At least nothing he'd found in his meticulous pre-trip research. Curiosity piqued, he adjusted his route to follow the subtle vibrations, moving perpendicular to his planned path. The canyon narrowed further, forcing him to remove his pack and push it ahead of him through certain passages. The air grew noticeably cooler, with occasional wafts of what seemed like artificially conditioned air, crisp and oddly sterile compared to the sage-scented warmth of the open canyon. The narrow passage suddenly opened into a small box canyon that didn't appear on any of his maps. The tourist stood motionless, trying to process what lay before him. Embedded in the far wall, partially concealed by natural rock formations and what appeared to be carefully placed boulders, was a structure that had no business existing in this wilderness. A massive steel door, easily 15 feet high and twice as wide, was set into the canyon wall. Its surface, painted a reddish brown to mimic the surrounding stone, would have been nearly invisible from a distance or from above. Only from this precise angle, standing in this specific section of the unmapped box canyon, was the facility entrance visible at all. The tourist's heart hammered against his ribs, a cold sweat breaking out despite the desert heat. Professional curiosity warred with instinctive caution. 20 years of backcountry experience had taught him to respect boundaries, particularly unexpected ones, but his documentation instincts kicked in immediately. He unclipped the professional-grade camera from his pack's side pocket, a tool he'd initially brought for capturing landscape vistas rather than whatever this was. Through the viewfinder, details emerged that his naked eye had missed. Discrete security cameras were positioned at the upper corners of the doorframe, their lenses almost indistinguishable from the textured surface of the metal. A keypad access panel, similarly camouflaged, was set at waist height beside the entrance. Most disturbing were the tire tracks in the sandy soil, recent ones, partially obscured by half-hearted attempts at concealment. The vibration he'd felt earlier was stronger here, a constant mechanical hum that seemed to emanate from deep within the rock face. More unsettling was the faint sound of what might have been ventilation systems, a soft, rhythmic whooshing that no natural process could explain. The tourist lowered his camera, his breathing shallow as his mind raced through explanations. Military installation? Unlikely. He'd researched restricted areas thoroughly before planning his route. Private research facility? Possibly, but permits for construction in protected canyon lands were virtually impossible to obtain. Some kind of mining or extraction operation? That might explain the vibrations, but not the elaborate concealment. His professional instincts took over. The meticulous attention to detail that made him exceptional at his job now focused on documenting this anomaly. He circled the perimeter of the small canyon, maintaining distance from the door while photographing it from multiple angles. The ground near the entrance showed signs of recent activity, boot prints of various sizes, cigarette butts despite the extreme fire danger in the area. Even a discarded energy drink, and that couldn't have been there more than a few days, judging by its unblemished aluminum surface. The tourist checked his GPS unit, marking his location precisely. According to the device, he was still within the boundaries of public land, though in a section so remote and difficult to access that it might as well have been on another planet. Cell service was, as expected, non-existent, but his satellite messenger would allow emergency communication if necessary. As he documented the site, a metallic groan emanated from the door, freezing him in place. The sound of hydraulic systems engaging echoed through the small canyon, and the massive portal began to move. The tourist ducked behind a large boulder, camera clutched to his chest, heart pounding so loudly he feared it might be audible over the mechanical sounds. Through a narrow gap between rocks, he watched as the door swung outward. 2 figures emerged, dressed in what appeared to be standard-issue desert camouflage, but lacking any identifiable military insignia. They were armed, not with the rifles or sidearms typical of security personnel, but with unusual weapons that resembled oversized tasers with bulky power packs. Their conversation carried across the still canyon air. "Told you I heard something out here," the taller one said, scanning the perimeter. "Probably just another coyote," his companion replied, sounding bored. "Or those sensors are glitching again. 3rd false alarm this month. Protocol says we check every alert." You want to explain to the director why we ignored one? They moved in a practiced pattern, checking the immediate area around the entrance. The tourist remained motionless, barely breathing, grateful for the concealment provided by the boulder and the shadows of the late morning sun. "See? Nothing," the second man said after a cursory inspection. "Let's get back inside. The shift change is in 20 minutes and I want to catch Dr. Mercer before she goes down to sub-level 3. "Fine, but log it properly this time. I'm not covering for you again." The men retreated through the doorway, which began its automated closing sequence. The tourist waited 5 full minutes after the entrance had sealed before emerging from his hiding place, legs trembling with adrenaline and cramped muscles. What he'd just witnessed confirmed that this wasn't merely some forgotten infrastructure or abandoned research station. This was active, staffed, and deliberately concealed from public knowledge. The mention of sub-levels suggested an extensive facility hidden within the canyon walls or perhaps extending beneath them. A rational voice in his mind urged caution, suggested retreat. This was clearly something beyond his understanding, potentially dangerous, definitely restricted. The sensible action would be to return to civilization and report his findings to the proper authorities. But 2 decades of exploring had cultivated not just caution, but also an insatiable curiosity. He'd never encountered anything remotely like this. A secret door in an unmapped canyon, armed guards with unidentifiable equipment, references to directors and sublevels. It was the most significant discovery of his amateur career, and walking away without understanding more felt impossible. The door had been open for perhaps 30 seconds, enough time to glimpse a sterile corridor beyond, brightly lit with what appeared to be standard industrial lighting. Nothing overtly sinister, nothing that immediately screamed danger. Just a corridor that shouldn't exist, leading into the heart of a canyon that was supposed to be untouched wilderness. The tourist returned to a safe vantage point half a mile from the hidden entrance, making camp in a natural alcove that offered both shade and concealment. From his pack, he retrieved equipment that spoke to years of documenting remote locations: a compact but powerful spotting scope, a digital recorder with a directional microphone, a small notebook waterproofed for field conditions, and a set of binoculars with night vision capability. He established his observation post methodically, securing the spotting scope to provide a clear view of the facility entrance while remaining hidden from any patrols. The afternoon passed slowly, the heat of the day building to its peak before beginning its gradual descent. Through his scope, he observed 3 shift changes, each following the same pattern: the door opening briefly, personnel exchanging places, the entrance sealing again. The tourist documented everything with professional precision: times, numbers of personnel, any equipment visible during the exchanges. What emerged was the picture of a facility operating on 8-hour shifts, with approximately 6 to 8 staff members per rotation, suggesting a total on-site personnel count of at least 24. More telling were the supply deliveries. Twice during his observation, vehicles arrived, unmarked white vans that navigated the supposedly impassable terrain with suspicious ease, suggesting the existence of a concealed access road. Cases of equipment, food supplies, and what appeared to be laboratory materials were quickly unloaded and transported inside. After nightfall, protected by darkness and his night vision equipment, the tourist dared to approach closer. Near the entrance, partially concealed by artificially arranged rock formations, he discovered several disturbing items: a torn patch bearing an insignia he didn't recognize, documents that had apparently been improperly disposed of, and most concerning, what appeared to be a biohazard container with its seal intact, but separated from whatever transport had brought it. The documents, though mostly shredded, contained fragments of information, references to Project Substratum, containment protocols, and most alarmingly, specimen security measures. One partially intact page included a floor plan showing what appeared to be laboratory spaces and something labeled Observation Chamber Alpha. The tourist photographed everything, his hands steady despite his racing heart. This went beyond unusual. This was concerning. A secret facility with biohazard materials operating in protected wilderness without public knowledge suggested activities that were likely illegal and potentially dangerous. His satellite messenger offered limited communication capabilities, enough to send an emergency alert with GPS coordinates, but insufficient for transmitting the photographs and detailed information he'd gathered. For that, he would need to return to civilization. The decision to report his findings led to the question of which authorities to approach. Local law enforcement seemed inadequate for a situation of this magnitude. The tourist considered his options as he carefully packed away his evidence. The following morning, he hiked to the nearest town, a small settlement primarily serving as a resupply point for backcountry hikers and weekend tourists visiting the more accessible sections of the canyon system. The sheriff's office occupied a modest building on the main street, its sun-bleached wooden sign and single patrol vehicle suggesting limited resources. Inside, a deputy in his late 50s looked up from a computer screen, regarding the tourist with the mild curiosity typically reserved for out-of-towners. "Help you with something?" The deputy's tone was neither friendly nor hostile, simply the practiced neutrality of small-town law enforcement accustomed to dealing with passing travelers. The tourist approached the desk, lowering his voice despite the empty office. "I need to report something unusual I found while hiking in the canyon system. Something that shouldn't be there." The deputy's expression didn't change. A lot of unusual things out in those canyons. Folks find old mining equipment, native artifacts, all sorts of things they think are mysterious. "This is different," the tourist insisted, pulling out his camera. "There's a facility built into one of the canyon walls. Hidden entrance, armed guards, regular deliveries. I have photographs and—" "Which section were you hiking in?" the deputy interrupted, his posture subtly shifting. The tourist hesitated, then named the remote area where he'd made his discovery. The deputy's demeanor changed immediately, though the shift was subtle. A slight narrowing of the eyes, a new tension in his shoulders. "That area's restricted, has been for years. Environmental recovery zone. You shouldn't have been there at all. It's not marked on any maps I reviewed. There were no signs, no barriers. Maps get outdated. Signs get vandalized." The deputy stood, closing the distance between them. "I'm going to need to see your permit for backcountry hiking." The tourist produced his documentation, all proper and in order. The deputy examined it with exaggerated thoroughness. "These look fine, but they don't cover restricted areas. I should write you up for that." He handed the permits back. "As for what you think you saw, there are several research stations monitoring environmental conditions throughout the canyon system. University projects, geological survey teams, nothing sinister about scientific research." "These weren't scientists," the tourist insisted. "They were armed guards, and the facility was deliberately camouflaged." The deputy sighed, the sound of a man accustomed to dealing with overexcited tourists. "Look, those canyons play tricks on you. Heat, isolation, dehydration. They can make you see things that aren't quite right. I've been working this area for 26 years, and I've heard every story imaginable." He returned to his desk, the conversation clearly concluding in his mind. "My advice? Stick to the marked trails, keep your permits current, and leave the conspiracy theories at home. Makes for a more enjoyable vacation." The tourist recognized the dismissal for what it was, not mere bureaucratic indifference, but something more deliberate. Either the deputy was genuinely unaware of the facility, unlikely given his reaction to the location, or he was intentionally deflecting. Outside the sheriff's office, standing in the harsh midday sun of the small town's main street, the tourist considered his next steps. The facility's existence, the armed guards, the biohazard materials, all pointed to something significant and potentially concerning operating without public knowledge or oversight. His satellite phone contained enough evidence to warrant investigation by higher authorities, federal agencies with jurisdiction over protected lands, or unauthorized construction. The question was which agency to approach, and how to do so without alerting whoever was operating the hidden facility. That night, in his motel room with the curtains drawn and the door locked, the tourist spread his evidence across the bed. Photographs, notes, the fragments of documents he'd recovered. Sleep was impossible, his mind racing with questions and theories, each more disturbing than the last. Whatever was happening in that canyon, someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to keep it hidden. The tourist's decades of experience in remote exploration had led him to many unusual discoveries: abandoned mining operations, forgotten historical sites, even occasionally illegal activities like drug caches or poaching camps. But nothing like this. Nothing with this level of organization, funding, and deliberate concealment. Tomorrow he would drive to the nearest city with a federal building. He would present his evidence in person, ensuring it reached authorities with the proper jurisdiction and resources. But tonight, he would compile everything, creating both digital and physical backups of his findings. As he worked through his documentation, a plan formed, not just to report what he'd found, but to return to the canyon for more definitive evidence. Now that he knew what to look for, He could approach more strategically, perhaps even find a way to determine what purpose the facility served. The tourist was no longer just a man on vacation, pursuing his decades-long passion for exploration. He had become something else, an accidental investigator, stumbling upon a mystery that demanded resolution. Whatever secrets that hidden door in the Arizona Canyon concealed, he was now irrevocably connected to them. Outside his motel window, a white van with darkened windows pulled into the parking lot, its unmarked exterior reflecting the neon lights of the vacancy sign. Dawn broke hesitantly over the small desert town, the first rays of sunlight illuminating dust particles suspended in the still air. The tourist had barely slept, his mind cycling through the implications of what he'd discovered. The white van that had arrived at the motel last night remained in the parking lot, its presence an unspoken threat he couldn't ignore. After a perfunctory breakfast at the town's only diner, where he felt eyes tracking his movements despite seeing no obvious observers, the tourist made his way to the County Historical Society. The building, a converted frontier-era bank with sandstone walls and narrow windows, promised the kind of institutional memory that might shed light on the canyon's secrets. Inside, the air conditioning battled ineffectually against the desert heat. A collection of glass display cases housed artifacts from the region's past: Native American pottery fragments, mining equipment, sepia-toned photographs of stern-faced settlers. At the main desk, a woman in her 60s looked up from a computer terminal that seemed jarringly modern against the building's 19th-century architecture. "Research visit?" she asked, her tone suggesting this was an unusual occurrence. The tourist nodded, maintaining the casual demeanor of an enthusiastic amateur historian. "I'm interested in the development of the Western Canyonlands, particularly any research stations or government installations from the Cold War era." If the request raised suspicions, the archivist didn't show it. "Most of our records are digitized now, but the older material is still in physical form. How far back are you looking to go?" 1950s through 1970s primarily," he replied, having calculated that any secret government facility would likely date to the height of Cold War experimentation. The archivist led him to a terminal in the corner of the reading room. "Start here for the digitized newspaper archives and land records. For the physical materials, I'll need to bring those out from storage. Any specific area you're researching?" The tourist named a region approximately 5 miles from his actual discovery, close enough to be relevant but distant enough to avoid raising immediate alarms. Left alone at the terminal, he began systematically searching through digital archives. Land acquisition records revealed a pattern. Throughout the 1960s, parcels of land in the canyon system had been purchased by a series of shell companies, eventually consolidating under an entity called Western Resource Development Corporation. The company appeared in tax records until 1972, then vanished without explanation. More interesting were the newspaper archives. A local weekly publication, long since defunct, had run a series of articles in 1967, questioning unusual activity in the remote canyons. Locals had reported strange lights, unexplained vehicles, and occasional tremors. The final article in the series noted that the reporter had been reassigned to cover county agricultural developments instead. When the archivist returned with a cart of physical materials, bound newspapers, land survey maps, and a collection of local government minutes, the tourist shifted his focus to these primary sources. A geological survey from 1966 contained the first significant clue. The report, commissioned by the State University, had mapped subsurface features throughout the canyon system. One section had been redacted with black marker, but holding the page to the light revealed faint outlines of what appeared to be an extensive cave system or artificial excavation, precisely in the area where he'd found the hidden door. "Find anything interesting?" The archivist's voice startled him. She stood closer than necessary, her eyes flicking to the survey map. "Just trying to piece together the research history of the region," the tourist replied evenly. "Seems like there was significant geological interest in the 1960s. The uranium boom," she said with a nod. "Every canyon in the Southwest was being surveyed back then. Most came up empty." Her emphasis on "most" carried an unspoken implication. The tourist decided to test the waters. "I noticed some unusual redactions in this report. Was that common practice?" The archivist hesitated, then lowered her voice. "There's a collection we don't usually make available to casual researchers. Personal papers from Dr. Emmett Holbrook, the geologist who led that survey. After his retirement, he donated them with the stipulation they remain sealed until 20 years after his death." She paused. "That was 15 years ago. So they're still restricted?" "Technically, But Holbrook had concerns about what they found out there. Said the public deserved to know eventually. She studied the tourist's face. "You're not just a history buff, are you?" "I saw something in the canyons," he admitted, calculating that this potential ally might have valuable information, something that doesn't appear on any public maps. The archivist glanced around the empty reading room, then retrieved a key from her pocket. "Wait here." She returned 10 minutes later with a worn leather portfolio. "These never went into our official collection. Holbrook gave them to my predecessor personally." She placed it on the table. "I've got cataloging to do." "Take your time." Inside the portfolio, the tourist found Holbrook's personal field notes, photographs, and hand-drawn maps from the 1966 survey. The geologist had documented an extensive natural cave system subsequently modified with concrete reinforcement and what appeared to be pressure doors, infrastructure far beyond what any university research project would require. Most disturbing were Holbrook's final notes, dated November 1967. "Project Substratum has been reassigned to military oversight. All civilian personnel removed. Our findings regarding the anomalous isotope formations have been classified. I fear what they intend to do with what we discovered. The energy potential is beyond anything currently understood, but the instability makes it unsuitable for weapons development. I've been warned not to pursue this further." Accompanying these notes was a faded photograph showing a natural chamber deep within the cave system. The image quality was poor, but it captured what appeared to be crystalline formations emitting light sufficient to illuminate the surrounding rock walls. The tourist carefully photographed each document with his phone, ensuring the flash was disabled. When the archivist returned, he thanked her for her assistance. "Whatever you saw out there," she said quietly, "you're not the first. Every few years someone comes in asking similar questions. A journalist from Phoenix in 1983, an environmental scientist in 1997, a geology graduate student in 2008. Her expression darkened. None of them published anything. The journalist's car was found abandoned near the highway. The others just stopped asking questions. "Have you ever reported this?" "To whom?" "The sheriff's department." She shook her head. "This town exists because of what's out there. Not officially, not on paper, but the reality is clear enough. The facility employs people, contracts with local businesses. Half the town knows something's out there. They just don't ask questions." The tourist left the Historical Society with more questions than answers, but with a vital historical context. Whatever operated in the canyon had origins in the Cold War era, beginning as scientific research before transitioning to military control. Following coordinates found in Holbrook's notes, the tourist drove his rental vehicle along unpaved back roads to what the geologist had labeled Initial Research Outpost Alpha. The location, approximately 12 miles from the hidden facility, was now abandoned. A cluster of concrete buildings surrounded by chain-link fencing topped with rusted barbed wire. The facility had the unmistakable aesthetic of 1960s government construction, utilitarian concrete blocks with narrow windows, designed for function rather than form. The main gate hung partially open, its padlock long since broken by previous trespassers. Inside the perimeter, desert plants had reclaimed much of the compound. The tourist moved cautiously through the administrative building, documenting everything with his camera. Most rooms had been stripped of equipment and records, but the physical infrastructure remained. Offices, what appeared to be laboratories, and a large space that might have been a briefing room. In what had once been the facility director's office, he discovered a floor safe hidden beneath a built-in cabinet that had partially collapsed. The safe was open and empty, save for a single document that had fallen behind it. A personnel transfer order dated January 1968, reassigning all scientific staff from Outpost Alpha to Main Research Facility, Sublevel 3. The tourist photographed the document, adding it to his growing collection of evidence. As he exited the abandoned outpost, he noticed fresh tire tracks overlaying his own. Someone had arrived and departed while he was inside. The implications were clear. He was being monitored. The tourist spent the afternoon planning his return to the hidden facility. The historical records had confirmed his suspicions. What he'd discovered was likely a Cold War-era research installation that had somehow remained operational for decades, evolving from scientific research to something classified enough to warrant armed guards and sophisticated concealment. He purchased supplies from different stores to avoid attracting attention: extra batteries, a more powerful flashlight, a small drone with camera capabilities, and a portable hard drive for redundant evidence storage. At a sporting goods store, He selected climbing equipment that would allow him to access the canyon from an approach unlikely to be monitored. As darkness fell, he drove his rental car to a popular camping area 15 miles from his target, establishing an alibi with the site manager about his intended hiking route in the opposite direction from the hidden facility. Once night had fully descended, he set out on foot, using natural terrain features and his night vision equipment to navigate without artificial light. The approach took nearly 4 hours, requiring 2 difficult climbs and a traverse along a narrow ledge. By 2 a.m. he had reached a vantage point directly above the hidden entrance, concealed by a natural rock formation that offered both cover and a clear view of the facility. Activity at the hidden door had decreased during the night shift, with only 1 personnel exchange observed during his first 2 hours of surveillance. Using the drone, he captured detailed footage of the entrance mechanism and the surrounding terrain, confirming that no obvious sensors were positioned to detect approach from above. At approximately 4:30 a.m., an opportunity presented itself. A delivery van arrived and the entrance procedure revealed a critical detail. The door remained open for a full 60 seconds after the vehicle entered before automatic closing mechanisms engaged. The timing was consistent across 3 observed entrances, suggesting an automated system rather than manual control. The tourist calculated risk factors. Dawn was still over an hour away. The night shift appeared minimally staffed. The entrance sequence was predictable. If he timed his approach correctly, he could slip inside during the next delivery or shift change. At 5:17 a.m., his patience was rewarded. A white van identical to the one he'd observed at his motel arrived at the entrance. As the massive door swung open, the tourist activated his drone, sending it on a pre-programmed flight path that would create a minor distraction. Nothing alarming enough to trigger a security response, but sufficient to draw attention away from the entrance for crucial seconds. The drone performed as planned, buzzing near the vehicle's driver's side window before flying erratically toward the canyon rim. The driver and the security personnel who had emerged to assist with unloading both tracked the drone's movement, providing the tourist with his opportunity. Moving with the practiced stealth developed through decades of wilderness navigation, he slipped from his hiding place and pressed against the canyon wall, using the vehicle itself as cover. When the guards turned their attention to the unloading process, he slipped inside the open doorway, finding concealment behind a stack of supply crates just inside the entrance. The massive door sealed behind him with a hydraulic hiss, leaving him in a brightly lit corridor that stretched deeper into the canyon wall. The immediate entrance area appeared to be a security checkpoint and receiving bay, currently empty as the guards assisted with the delivery outside. Beyond this area, the corridor branched into 3 directions, with directional signage indicating administration, research levels, and residential. The tourist moved quickly toward research levels, reasoning that this would lead to the heart of whatever operations justified such elaborate secrecy. The corridor descended at a gentle slope, reinforced concrete giving way to what appeared to be natural cave walls stabilized with modern support structures. The lighting remained institutional and harsh, illuminating a facility that blended military functionality with scientific infrastructure. At the end of the corridor, a security door required keycard access. This presented an obstacle until the tourist noticed a maintenance panel nearby. Years of urban exploration had taught him that service access often bypassed security measures intended for normal traffic. The panel opened easily, revealing a utility chase that paralleled the main corridor. Squeezing into the narrow space, he followed electrical conduits and ventilation ducts deeper into the facility. Through ventilation grills, he glimpsed laboratories, equipment rooms, and what appeared to be a server farm. The scale of the operation became increasingly apparent. This was no small research outpost, but a major installation carved into the living rock of the canyon system. After navigating the utility chase for approximately 10 minutes, he emerged into what appeared to be a storage level. Unlike the carefully maintained upper areas, this section showed signs of age and less frequent use. Crates stamped with faded government markings from the 1960s and 70s lined the walls, along with filing cabinets and equipment covered in protective sheeting. The tourist documented everything methodically, filling his phone's storage with photographs and short video clips. A set of blueprints mounted on the wall caught his attention, facility schematics that revealed the true extent of the installation. What he had discovered was merely the modern entrance to a complex that extended nearly half a mile into the canyon wall and descended through 7 sublevels, the deepest of which was labeled simply containment. Moving through the storage level, he discovered files that had apparently been consigned to forgotten archives. Unlike the carefully redacted materials he'd seen elsewhere, these documents contained detailed information about Project Substratum and its evolution over decades. The project had indeed begun as scientific research. Geologists had discovered unusual radiation signatures emanating from crystalline formations deep within the cave system. Initial analysis suggested potential energy applications far beyond nuclear fission or fusion, but something had gone wrong in the early testing phases. References to an incident in 1967 appeared in multiple reports, followed by military assumption of project control. More recent documents, dated within the last 5 years, indicated a revival of research under a new designation, Project Resonance. These materials contained technical language beyond the tourist's expertise, but he gathered that researchers had resumed active work with whatever had been discovered or created in the original project. Most disturbing was a security directive dated just 3 months prior. All personnel are reminded that containment protocols remain at level alpha following the January 17th event. Unauthorized access to sub-level 7 is strictly prohibited. Exposure protocols are to be followed without exception. The tourist backed up his findings to his portable hard drive, creating redundant copies of all evidence. As he prepared to navigate back to the surface, a low-frequency vibration began to pulse through the facility, stronger and more rhythmic than what he had felt outside. The storage room's lighting flickered momentarily, and in the distance, he heard an alarm begin to sound. The tourist's escape from the facility proved more challenging than his entrance. The alarm, while not apparently related to his presence, had increased security vigilance throughout the complex. He was forced to remain hidden in the storage level for nearly 3 hours before finding an opportunity to return through the utility chase to the upper level. By carefully timing his movements between security patrols, he eventually reached the receiving bay near the main entrance. A supply delivery provided his exit opportunity. As the massive door opened to admit another vehicle, he slipped out along the canyon wall, using the same route that had allowed his entrance. The return journey to his campsite was tense but uneventful, and by mid-afternoon, he had retrieved his rental car and checked into a different motel in a neighboring town, reasonably confident he had not been followed. Inside his new room, as he connected his camera and phone to his laptop to organize his evidence, he discovered something chilling. A handwritten note placed between the pages of his hiking map. Curiosity has consequences. You are interfering with matters beyond your understanding. This is your only warning. The note had not been there that morning, which meant someone had accessed his equipment while he was investigating the facility. More disturbing was the implication. They had known his plans, but had chosen to warn rather than stop him. Either they were unsure of exactly what he had discovered, or they wanted to monitor his next moves. The tourist methodically checked his equipment for tracking devices, finding none. Nevertheless, he purchased a new phone at a big box store, paid cash, and activated it without providing personal information. Using public Wi-Fi at a chain restaurant, he uploaded encrypted copies of his evidence to cloud storage under an account not connected to his identity. The following morning, he decided on a different approach to authorities. Rather than the local sheriff, he drove to the regional office of the Bureau of Land Management, the federal agency with jurisdiction over the public lands where the hidden facility was located. The BLM office occupied a modern government building in a mid-sized city 2 hours from the canyon system. Inside, the tourist requested a meeting regarding unauthorized construction on protected federal lands. After a half-hour wait, he was ushered into the office of a field supervisor, a woman in her 40s with the weathered complexion of someone who spent considerable time outdoors. You reported concerns about construction in the Western Canyon complex, she began, consulting her computer screen. That's a remote area. What brought you out there? The tourist explained his hiking background and how he had stumbled upon the hidden entrance. He showed her photographs, carefully selected to demonstrate the facility's existence, without revealing how extensively he had investigated. The supervisor examined the images with a neutral expression that gradually hardened into skepticism. These could be from anywhere, and even if there is a structure in that location, it could be a legitimate research station with proper permits. It has armed guards, the tourist countered, biohazard materials, documents referring to containment protocols. That doesn't sound like a standard research station. Did you enter this alleged facility? Her tone shifted subtly. I documented what was visible from public land, he replied, not directly answering her question. The supervisor closed the image files on her computer. Mr. I don't believe I caught your name. I'd prefer to remain anonymous for now. She nodded as if this confirmed a suspicion. I understand you believe you found something concerning, but without more concrete evidence and specific coordinates, there's little I can do. If you'd like to file a formal report, our front desk can provide the appropriate forms. The dismissal was polite but firm. As the tourist gathered his materials, the supervisor added, I should mention that filing a false report to a federal agency is a serious offense, just something to keep in mind. In the hallway outside the supervisor's office, a young man in the uniform of a BLM junior field agent approached him. Sir, a word? He gestured toward an unoccupied conference room. Once the door closed behind them, the agent spoke quickly, his voice low. I overheard your meeting. I'm not supposed to say anything, but that area has been off limits to field inspections for years. Official policy is that it contains sensitive archaeological sites under protection. But you don't believe that, the tourist prompted. 2 years ago, an environmental assessment team tried to access that section of the canyon system. Standard procedure for updating management plans. They were denied entry by armed personnel with federal credentials that outranked BLM authority. The agent glanced nervously at the door. The team leader filed reports up the chain. A month later, she was transferred to Alaska. The assessment was never completed. Do you know anything about Project Substratum? The agent shook his head. Never heard that name. But whatever's out there has serious protection. Multiple agencies involved. Way above my clearance level. He moved toward the door. I've got a family. I can't get involved, but you should know. You're not the first person to ask questions. And the others. He left the implication hanging. Thank you, the tourist said simply. I never spoke to you, the agent replied, slipping out of the room. The warning was clear enough, reinforced when the tourist returned to his latest motel room to find it had been searched. The intrusion was professional, nothing obviously disturbed, but the nearly imperceptible markers he had placed on his luggage and door had been compromised. On his laptop, a text file had been created on the desktop. The message was direct. Your persistence is now formally noted. The facility you have documented is classified under national security protocols. Your continued investigation constitutes a potential threat to these protocols. All evidence in your possession should be surrendered to the nearest federal law enforcement office. Failure to comply will result in prosecution under relevant statutes. The threat was escalating from warning to legal intimidation. The tourist methodically gathered his evidence, making yet another backup to a micro SD card that he concealed in a specially modified hiking boot. Whatever he had stumbled upon clearly involved multiple government agencies and decades of classified operations. That evening, from a cybercafe with anonymous access, he sent carefully packaged evidence to 3 recipients: a national newspaper known for publishing government whistleblower materials, a non-profit organization specializing in government transparency litigation, and a prominent environmental law professor at a major university. Each package included a detailed account of his discoveries, coordinates of the hidden facility, historical documentation, and photographs. In his cover message, he wrote, I have discovered an unauthorized and classified facility operating within protected federal lands in the Arizona Canyon system. The facility appears to have originated as a Cold War-era research project called Substratum, involving unusual geological formations with potential energy applications. Current operations include biohazard materials and strict containment protocols. Attempts to report through proper channels have been met with intimidation and surveillance. I am now being explicitly threatened. If anything happens to me, the attached evidence should explain why. The tourist checked out of his motel before dawn, paying cash and leaving no forwarding information. He drove his rental car to the nearest major airport, returned it, and purchased a ticket to Chicago under his real name, a calculated risk that would create an official record of his departure from the region. As he waited for his flight, he composed a final message on his secure phone, scheduled to send automatically if he didn't enter a cancellation code within 24 hours. If you are reading this, I have been detained or otherwise prevented from maintaining contact. Yesterday, I returned to the hidden facility in the Western Canyon complex to gather conclusive evidence of its purpose. What I found on sub-level 7 explains everything: the secrecy, the military presence, the containment protocols. I now understand why they are terrified of exposure. The public needs to know what is happening beneath that canyon. He attached coordinates, access instructions, and security bypass methods he had documented during his infiltration. The message was addressed to the same 3 recipients who had received his evidence packages. Boarding his flight, the tourist felt the weight of his discovery pressing upon him. Whatever was happening in that hidden facility, whatever had begun in the 1960s and continued in secret for decades, was significant enough to warrant extraordinary measures to keep it hidden. But secrets buried in the earth had a way of eventually reaching the surface, and he was now the conduit for this particular truth. As the aircraft taxied toward the runway, he glanced out the window at the desert landscape receding behind him. Somewhere out there, beneath ancient stone, something had been found or created that powerful interests were determined to keep hidden. The question that now consumed him was simple. What had they been containing on sublevel 7? And why had it made him scream in terror when he finally discovered it? Chicago greeted the tourist with icy winds and urban anonymity, a stark contrast to the sun-baked silence of the Arizona canyons. For 3 days, he maintained a careful routine designed to appear normal, while watching for signs of surveillance. His apartment showed no evidence of intrusion, and his behavior, returning to work, attending a scheduled dental appointment, grocery shopping at his usual store, projected the image of someone who had simply returned from vacation. Behind this facade of normality, he was meticulously planning his return to the canyon. The scheduled message he had set up before boarding his flight remained unsent. The 24-hour dead man switch reset daily as he prepared for what he knew would be his most dangerous expedition yet. On the 4th evening, in his apartment with curtains drawn and electronic devices stored in the bathroom with the shower running to mask any conversation, he laid out the specialized equipment acquired through various cash transactions at different stores across the city. A tactical vest with multiple concealed pockets, night vision goggles with recording capability, a satellite phone modified to transmit data packets even in areas with signal jammers, miniaturized camera equipment that could be hidden in clothing, a medical kit containing radiation exposure treatments and broad-spectrum antibiotics, 3 different GPS devices, each programmed with escape routes from the canyon. The tourist methodically tested each piece, verifying battery levels and functionality. What he was planning went beyond trespassing or unauthorized access. It was a deliberate infiltration of what appeared to be a classified government facility. The consequences, if caught, would likely involve federal charges under national security statutes. This awareness had prompted his most important preparation, a comprehensive video deposition recorded on an encrypted drive, detailing every aspect of his discovery and subsequent investigation. The video, along with copies of all evidence he had gathered, was sealed in a waterproof container with explicit instructions to be delivered to his attorney if he failed to make contact within 7 days. "This will be my final attempt to document what exists beneath the canyon," he spoke to the camera in his concluding statement. "Whatever they're containing on sublevel 7 represents either a threat or an opportunity so significant that multiple government agencies have maintained a decades-long conspiracy to keep it hidden. The public deserves to know what's happening on federal land supposedly protected from development. If I don't return from this expedition, this record explains why and who is responsible." The tourist sent a carefully worded email to a former colleague at the accounting firm, a woman who had once been more than a co-worker before professional boundaries reasserted themselves. The message contained coded language they had developed during a previous audit of a problematic client. "Heading to the southwestern wilderness area we discussed last year for an extended documentary project, anticipating loss of communication for up to 5 days. If no contact by day 6, please remember our Milwaukee protocol." She would understand that Milwaukee protocol referred to a set of prearranged actions: contacting his attorney, checking specific storage locations, notifying certain trusted individuals. It was their shorthand for "something has gone catastrophically wrong." He booked his return flight to Arizona through a circuitous route, Chicago to Denver, Denver to Phoenix, with rental car reservations under a legitimate-seeming business name. His credit card would show normal vacation expenses, his phone would ping towers along expected tourist routes, and his accommodations would be unremarkable chain hotels favored by middle-aged professionals on extended business trips. The night before departure, he sat on his balcony overlooking the Chicago skyline, nursing a single glass of whiskey. 20 years of exploring remote locations had prepared him for physical challenges and survival situations, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for this. Deliberately returning to a facility where he had been explicitly warned away, likely under surveillance by entities with significant resources and authority. What drove him wasn't simple curiosity anymore. Something about the facility's history, the transition from scientific research to military control, the reference to containment protocols, it suggested that whatever lay on sub-level 7 represented something beyond ordinary classification. The tourist had spent his professional life detecting patterns in financial data, identifying anomalies that others overlooked. The pattern here suggested something extraordinary being hidden in plain sight, within public lands meant to be preserved and protected. The pre-dawn sky was just beginning to lighten when he shouldered his pack, outwardly an ordinary hiking backpack, internally reorganized to conceal his specialized equipment beneath layers of standard outdoor gear. The taxi driver who took him to O'Hare saw nothing unusual, just another middle-aged professional with hiking boots and sunglasses, headed west for recreation. 3 days later, under a moonless sky, the tourist approached the hidden facility from an entirely different direction than his previous visits. Satellite imagery and topographical maps had revealed a maintenance access point, a ventilation shaft disguised as a natural rock formation on the canyon rim, nearly a mile from the main entrance. His approach had been methodical. He had spent 2 days observing from different vantage points, noting patrol patterns, shift changes, and delivery schedules. The facility maintained comprehensive exterior surveillance, but even the most sophisticated security systems had vulnerabilities. In this case, the assumption that no one would attempt access from the nearly sheer canyon walls above the ventilation shaft. Using advanced climbing techniques and equipment, the tourist had ascended from the canyon floor under cover of darkness, reaching the disguised ventilation structure shortly after midnight. The grating was secured with tamper-evident locks, but years of exposure to desert conditions had weakened the mounting brackets. With careful application of pressure, he was able to create an opening just wide enough to slip through without triggering the tamper sensors on the locks themselves. The ventilation shaft descended vertically for approximately 30 feet before intersecting with a horizontal maintenance tunnel. According to the facility blueprints he had photographed during his previous infiltration, this tunnel would eventually connect to the main ventilation system serving the deepest levels, including sub-level 7. Moving through the cramped tunnel required painful precision. The tourist advanced inch by inch, distributing his weight to avoid creating detectable vibrations. The air grew progressively warmer and carried a faint metallic scent that seemed to intensify as he moved deeper into the facility's infrastructure. After nearly 2 hours of painstaking progress, he reached a junction where the maintenance tunnel connected to the main ventilation system. A heavy-duty filtration unit blocked direct access, but its inspection panel provided an entry point into the main duct. From here, navigation became more complex. The tourist referenced the blueprint images stored on his specialized phone, identifying the branch that should lead toward the facility's lowest levels. The ducts were larger here, allowing him to move more quickly while still maintaining silence. Air quality monitors and motion sensors presented periodic obstacles, each requiring careful circumvention. The facility's designers had anticipated many security threats, but apparently not someone with his particular combination of skills, patience, and knowledge of the installation's layout. At a critical junction, the tourist paused to don a specialized breathing apparatus. If the containment protocols referenced in the documentation involved biological or chemical agents, standard filtration would be inadequate. The system he wore would protect against everything short of military-grade nerve agents. The ventilation duct terminated at a large filtration chamber serving the lowest levels. Here, a maintenance access door provided entry to a utility corridor running parallel to the main hallways of sub-level 7. The tourist slipped through, immediately noticing the difference in this level compared to the upper portions of the facility. Security was omnipresent. Cameras covered every angle. Pressure sensors were embedded in the flooring, and airlock-style doors separated each section. The utility corridor provided limited cover, but eventually he would need to access the main areas to discover what was being contained. An opportunity presented itself when an alarm sounded in a distant section of the level, not an intruder alert, but what appeared to be an equipment malfunction requiring immediate attention. Security personnel moved purposefully toward the disturbance, creating a momentary gap in coverage. The tourist seized the opportunity, slipping from the utility corridor into the main hallway. Signage indicated he was in Sector 3 of Sub-Level 7, with Containment Chamber Alpha located in the adjacent sector. Moving with deliberate purpose to avoid attracting attention, he followed directional indicators toward his objective. The entrance to Containment Chamber Alpha featured multiple security measures, keycard access, biometric scanning, and what appeared to be a chemical sensor designed to detect unauthorized personnel. Circumventing these directly would be impossible. Instead, the tourist located an observation room overlooking the chamber. The room was darkened but unoccupied, its door secured with only standard keycard access, a vulnerability he could exploit with the electronic bypass tool concealed in his equipment. Once inside the observation room, he experienced his first unobstructed view of what lay at the heart of Project Substratum. The containment chamber below was massive, easily 100 feet in diameter, extending vertically through multiple levels. In the center, suspended within concentric rings of what appeared to be superconducting material, floated a crystalline formation, unlike anything in known geology. The crystal, if that term even applied, seemed to both absorb and emit light simultaneously, creating visual distortions in the surrounding air. Its surface shifted between states of matter, portions appearing solid while others demonstrated fluid or even gaseous properties. Most disturbing was its apparent relationship with time and space around it. Objects near its perimeter seemed to experience temporal distortion, moving slightly out of sync with the rest of the chamber. Surrounding the anomaly, a team of researchers in specialized containment suits worked at various instrument stations. Their movements suggested routine. These were people who had grown accustomed to working in proximity to something that defied conventional physical laws. The tourist activated his recording equipment, documenting everything visible from his vantage point. The implications were staggering. This wasn't merely classified research or weapons development. The facility appeared to be containing something that fundamentally challenged our understanding of reality itself. As he adjusted his camera to capture additional angles, a monitoring console in the observation room suddenly activated, its screen displaying a security alert. Unauthorized access detected. Sector 3 Observation Deck B. He had triggered a silent alarm. Within seconds, the door to the observation room slid open, and 3 security personnel in tactical gear entered, weapons raised. "Do not move," the lead officer commanded. "Hands visible. Any sudden movement will be considered hostile action." The tourist complied, mind racing through escape scenarios. The guards approached cautiously, one moving to secure his equipment, while another produced restraints. "Identity confirmed," the third guard said, looking at a handheld scanner. "Subject matches description from previous security alerts. Containment breach protocol is now active." As they moved to restrain him, the facility's main alarm system suddenly activated, a pulsing siren accompanied by strobing emergency lights. The crystalline anomaly in the containment chamber below had begun to pulse in rhythm with the alarm, its surface becoming increasingly unstable. "Containment fluctuation in progress," announced an automated voice over the facility's communication system. "All personnel initiate emergency protocols." This is not a drill. The guard's attention momentarily shifted toward the viewing window, providing the tourist with his only opportunity. With practiced precision, he triggered the miniature flashbang device concealed in his vest, a non-lethal distraction designed to disorient rather than harm. The disoriented guards recoiled as the tourist bolted for the door, activating the emergency release to override the security lockdown. The corridor beyond was in chaos, with personnel rushing toward emergency stations as the facility's systems responded to the apparent containment breach. Whether his presence had somehow triggered the anomaly's behavior or it was coincidental timing, the effect worked to his advantage. The tourist moved against the flow of evacuating researchers, heading deeper into Sublevel 7 rather than toward the exits. If he could reach the emergency ventilation controls, he could create a secondary diversion. Rounding a corner, he encountered a research team evacuating a laboratory. One of them, a senior scientist judging by the insignia on her containment suit, looked directly at him and recognized he didn't belong. "Security breach in Corridor E," she shouted into her communication device. "Unknown subject heading toward central control." The tourist changed direction immediately, diving into a side passage as security personnel converged on his previous position. The facility's layout was complex, but his study of the blueprints provided crucial advantages. A maintenance ladder at the corridor's end would provide access to the level's infrastructure space, a maze of conduits and support systems that could lead to an alternative exit route. As he climbed, the facility's vibrations intensified. Whatever was happening with the crystalline anomaly was escalating, affecting the entire structure. Through grated flooring, he glimpsed researchers racing to stabilize their equipment as monitoring systems displayed increasingly erratic readings. In the infrastructure space, he navigated by memory and instinct, following cable runs that logic suggested would lead toward the facility's emergency systems. The space was cramped and poorly lit, but less monitored than the main corridors. After several minutes of difficult progress, he reached a junction box controlling emergency ventilation for the eastern quadrant. A precisely applied surge from his electronic tools triggered the emergency purge system, creating a cascading failure that would force evacuation of that entire section. The resulting confusion should provide cover for his escape attempt. The tourist backtracked to a vertical access shaft he had noted on the blueprints, an emergency evacuation route that would bypass the facility's main security checkpoints. As he suspected, the containment situation had triggered automated protocols that prioritized personnel evacuation over security containment. The access shaft led upward through 5 levels before terminating at an emergency exit designed to function even during power failures. Emerging into a utility room on one of the upper levels, he found himself in the midst of an organized evacuation. Facility personnel were too focused on emergency procedures to question his presence as he joined a group of researchers moving toward a secondary exit. The exit led to a previously unseen tunnel extending horizontally through the canyon wall, eventually emerging nearly half a mile from the main entrance. As evacuees streamed into the pre-dawn desert, emergency vehicles with unmarked government insignia converged on the area, their lights cutting through the darkness. The tourists separated from the evacuation group, using the confusion to slip into the boulder-strewn terrain at the canyon's edge. Behind him, the facility's emergency lighting cast an eerie glow against the canyon walls, while ahead lay miles of wilderness, through which he would need to navigate without being detected by the search teams that would inevitably follow. For 6 hours he moved without rest, using every technique he had developed over decades of wilderness exploration. He avoided ridgelines where he might be silhouetted, used creek beds to mask his trail, and changed direction frequently to confuse potential tracking. His night vision equipment allowed him to maintain a pace that would have been impossible for conventional pursuit. By mid-morning, he had reached the location where he had concealed his rental vehicle 3 days earlier, a natural overhang near an infrequently used fire road, miles from the facility and outside the likely search perimeter. As he started the engine, the satellite phone in his pack chimed, indicating successful transmission of the data package he had collected. The evidence was now secure on servers beyond the reach of those who would suppress it. The tourist pulled onto the highway, merging with tourist traffic headed toward the state line. In the rearview mirror, he could see military helicopters circling the canyon area and roadblocks being established on secondary routes. But he was already beyond their immediate search zone, with multiple state borders between him and the facility by nightfall. 2 days later, at a busy coffee shop in a major metropolitan area 2,000 miles from Arizona, the tourist sat at an outdoor table, sipping from a ceramic mug while scanning his surroundings with practiced casualness. He had chosen this location carefully, public enough to provide safety and visibility, busy enough that surveillance would be challenging, with multiple exit routes including a subway entrance directly across the street. At precisely 10:15 a.m., a woman in a tailored suit approached his table. Nothing in her appearance identified her profession, but her movement through the crowded space, efficient, aware, constantly assessing, marked her as the investigative journalist whose work on government transparency had led him to make contact. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, the prearranged phrase confirming her identity. The tourist gestured to the empty chair. "I was hoping for some company." After ordering coffee, she spoke quietly. "You claim to have evidence of an unauthorized government research facility operating on protected federal land. That's a significant allegation." "Not an allegation," the tourist replied, sliding a small external drive across the table. "Documented fact. Everything is there. Location coordinates, facility blueprints, historical documentation, and video of what they're containing on sub-level 7. And what exactly is that?" The tourist considered his response carefully. "Something that shouldn't be possible according to our current understanding of physics. A crystalline anomaly that appears to distort space-time around it. Whatever it is, the government has been studying it since the 1960s, transitioning from scientific research to military control after some kind of incident." The journalist pocketed the drive with practiced discretion. "If this is authentic, it represents one of the most significant government secrecy violations in decades. It's authentic, and it's already been distributed to multiple recipients. legal advocates, academic researchers, oversight committees. If anything happens to either of us, the information still gets out. You've created a dead man's switch. Several of them. What I witnessed in that facility, the public has a right to know. Not just about the secrecy or the misuse of protected land, but about the implications of what they're studying. This isn't conventional research or weapons development. It's something more fundamental. The journalist nodded, understanding the gravity of what she had been given. My team will verify everything before publication. If it checks out, we'll coordinate with international partners for simultaneous release. Maximum exposure provides the best protection against suppression attempts. They'll try to discredit the source. Me. Undoubtedly. Are you prepared for that? The tourist had considered this question extensively during his journey. My credibility comes from the evidence itself. 20 years of documented exploration, professional credentials, methodical documentation of everything I discovered. Let them attack my character. The facts speak for themselves. Their meeting concluded with arrangements for secure communication channels and contingency plans. As the journalist departed, the tourist remained at the table for precisely 17 minutes, long enough to avoid appearing connected to her, short enough to minimize exposure. For the next week, he maintained a careful routine in a rented apartment paid for with cash, venturing out only when necessary and monitoring news channels constantly. On the 8th day, the story broke simultaneously across multiple platforms. Classified government facility operating illegally in protected canyon lands. Whistleblower reveals decades-long secret research program. Project Substratum, inside the government's hidden physics experiment. The coverage was comprehensive and meticulously sourced. The investigative journalist had done her work thoroughly, corroborating the tourist's evidence with historical records, satellite imagery analysis, and statements from former government scientists who confirmed aspects of the facility's early research. Most explosive was the video footage from Containment Chamber Alpha, showing the crystalline anomaly and its apparent defiance of conventional physical laws. Scientific experts interviewed in the coverage described it as potentially the most significant discovery in modern physics, and questioned why such research had been kept secret from the scientific community for decades. Public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded with demands for government accountability. Environmental groups filed emergency injunctions regarding the unauthorized use of protected lands. Congressional oversight committees announced immediate investigations, while international scientific organizations called for transparent access to the research. Within 72 hours of the story breaking, official response began. FBI agents secured the facility perimeter. Department of Energy officials arrived with specialized equipment. Military personnel established a no-fly zone over the entire canyon system. The president announced the formation of an independent commission to investigate both the research program and the decision-making that had kept it classified for decades. From the window of another rented room in another city, the tourist watched the coverage on a television screen. Aerial footage showed a massive operation underway at the canyon, temporary structures being erected, specialized vehicles moving in and out. The entire area transformed from hidden secret to the focus of global attention. He felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that the truth was finally exposed. Concern about what the crystalline anomaly truly represented and whether it could be safely studied. Satisfaction that the decades-long violation of public land protection had been revealed. Most of all, he felt the weight of responsibility lifting. Whatever happened now would happen in the light of public knowledge and scientific scrutiny, not behind closed doors and classified protocols. The decision to expose what he had found had been the right one, regardless of personal consequences. The tourist powered down the television and began packing his few possessions. His role in this story was complete. He had done what his conscience demanded, bringing to light what should never have been hidden. The crystalline anomaly and its implications would now be studied by those with the expertise to understand it properly, under the watchful eyes of a public that deserved to know what existed beneath the canyon walls. As he left the room, he discarded the prepaid phone he had been using, his final act in a story that had begun with a simple hiking expedition and culminated in what would likely be remembered as one of the most significant revelations of the century. Whatever screams of terror had escaped him in that observation room overlooking the containment chamber had been justified. Some secrets were too profound to remain buried in the desert stone, regardless of who had put them there or why they had tried to keep them hidden. 3 months after the public revelation of Project Substratum, A sprawling operation had transformed the once secret canyon facility into what appeared to be a small scientific city. White research tents and prefabricated structures dotted the landscape where barren rock had previously concealed one of the government's most closely guarded secrets. Military checkpoints had been replaced with a more transparent security apparatus, still restrictive, but now operating under the watchful eyes of congressional oversight committees, independent scientific observers, and constant media scrutiny. The tourist observed this transformation through news coverage and satellite imagery, maintaining his distance while the initial investigations unfolded. His attorney had negotiated limited immunity in exchange for his testimony before a special Senate committee investigating the facility, an appearance conducted via secure video link with his identity partially obscured. The evidence he had provided proved irrefutable, forcing accountability from institutions that had operated for decades without it. From his temporary residence in a Midwestern city far from both the canyon and his Chicago home, the tourist tracked the cascading revelations that emerged as multiple federal agencies conducted overlapping investigations into Project Substratum. The Department of Justice had established a special task force to investigate criminal violations associated with the facility. Their preliminary findings, released in a heavily redacted 300-page report, confirmed what the tourist had suspected. The facility had operated outside proper oversight channels for decades, with its funding concealed through classified budgets spread across multiple agencies. Most disturbing were the human costs uncovered during the investigation. 17 researchers had died in the 1967 containment incident that had triggered military assumption of the project, deaths that had never been publicly acknowledged, with families told their loved ones had perished in classified overseas operations. Dozens more scientific personnel had experienced unexplained health effects after exposure to the crystalline anomaly, many developing rare cancers or neurological conditions that facility administrators had systematically covered up. The FBI had executed search warrants at offices across 3 states, seizing records related to the project's administration. 8 former facility directors and security officials now faced federal charges ranging from conspiracy to environmental crimes. The highest-ranking defendant, a former deputy director at the Department of Energy who had overseen the program through the 1990s, had been photographed in handcuffs being led from his suburban Virginia home, the image becoming emblematic of the government's accountability efforts. The environmental impact assessment, conducted by an independent team of scientists working under federal court supervision, documented significant violations of protected land statutes. Groundwater contamination from chemical agents used in early containment efforts had spread through subsurface aquifers, affecting areas miles from the facility itself. The canyon ecosystem showed measurable abnormalities in radiation levels, soil composition, and wildlife health, creating what the assessment termed a multi-generational remediation challenge. For the small town nearest the canyon, the revelations had brought both vindication and economic upheaval. Many residents had suspected something unusual operated in the remote canyons, with the facility providing direct and indirect employment for decades. Congressional hearings included testimony from local business owners who had been forced to sign extraordinary non-disclosure agreements simply to provide basic services to the installation, with violations punishable under national security statutes. "We always knew something was out there," the town's mayor testified, "but asking questions meant risking everything. Your business, your freedom, your place in the community." They made it clear that silence was the price of prosperity. The scientific community's response to the crystalline anomaly had evolved from initial skepticism to cautious astonishment. The International Panel of Physicists granted access to the containment chamber confirmed the tourists' documentation. The crystal-like formation appeared to create localized distortions in space-time, demonstrating properties that challenged fundamental physical constants previously thought immutable. "This represents potentially the most significant scientific discovery of the century," stated the report from the National Academy of Sciences. "The decision to classify this phenomenon for over 5 decades has deprived humanity of critical knowledge about the fundamental nature of our universe, while simultaneously preventing proper safety protocols from being developed by the broader scientific community." Public reaction had unfolded in predictable waves, initial shock giving way to outrage, followed by demands for accountability and reform. Congressional hearings drew record viewership as former officials attempted to justify decades of secrecy. Protests outside Department of Energy headquarters continued for weeks, with signs demanding "science in sunlight" and no more substratum projects. The president had addressed the nation from the Oval Office, announcing a comprehensive review of classified scientific research and the establishment of a new oversight framework designed to prevent similar abuses. Executive orders declassified thousands of documents related to other potentially problematic research programs, creating what political analysts described as a watershed moment in government transparency. International reactions varied from diplomatic concern to outright condemnation. The United Nations Security Council had convened a special session to discuss the implications of unauthorized research into fundamental physical phenomena, establishing protocols requiring member nations to disclose similar scientific anomalies discovered within their territories. 6 months after the revelations, substantive reforms were beginning to emerge from the political fallout. Bipartisan legislation established enhanced whistleblower protections for government scientists. Funding bills included strict provisions requiring all research, even classified projects, to undergo independent environmental and ethical review. A new Congressional Science Oversight Committee gained unprecedented access to previously restricted programs across multiple agencies. For the tourist, watching these developments unfold from a distance provided validation that his dangerous journey into Sublevel 7 had been justified. The physical evidence he had documented, combined with his methodical approach to gathering and preserving information, had made denial impossible even for the most powerful institutions involved. What had begun as a simple hiking expedition into remote canyon lands had cascaded into one of the most significant government accountability moments in modern history, a fact that still seemed surreal when he contemplated it during quiet moments alone. The ceremony took place in Washington, 1 year after the public revelation of Project Substratum. The tourist had initially resisted the recognition, preferring to remain anonymous, but the congressional committee investigating the facility had convinced him that his public acceptance of the newly created Transparency in Government Award would strengthen ongoing reform efforts. The East Room of the White House had been arranged for the occasion, with representatives from oversight committees, scientific institutions, environmental organizations, and media outlets filling the seats. The tourist sat in the front row, uncomfortable in the formal suit that replaced his usual outdoor attire, his weathered hands folded in his lap as he listened to the introductory remarks. "Today, we recognize extraordinary courage in service to truth," the committee chairperson stated from the podium. "For too long, our government operated on the principle that some knowledge was too sensitive for public awareness, some research too important for ordinary oversight. Project Substratum embodied this dangerous philosophy, concealing not only unprecedented scientific discoveries, but also environmental violations and human costs that deserved acknowledgement." On the video screens flanking the podium, images from the facility appeared: the massive hidden door in the canyon wall, the underground laboratories, and sanitized versions of the containment chamber footage. The tourist watched these images with a sense of disconnection, as if they represented someone else's experience rather than the most dangerous journey of his life. When the Secretary of the Interior approached the podium, the atmosphere in the room shifted subtly. As the cabinet official responsible for protected federal lands, including the canyon system where the facility had operated, her office had faced particular scrutiny during the investigations. "The individual we honor today reminds us that citizenship sometimes requires extraordinary risk," she began. "When institutions fail in their fundamental responsibilities, transparency, accountability, environmental stewardship, it falls to individuals of conscience to restore the balance. What this person discovered beneath the Arizona canyons represents not just a scientific anomaly, but a moral one, a failure of governance that required correction." The tourist shifted uncomfortably in his chair as attention gradually focused on him. His attorney had negotiated specific parameters for this appearance: no full-face photography, limited personal details in the official record, ongoing security protocols to protect him from potential retaliation from those still facing charges related to the facility. As he was invited to the podium to accept the award, a simple crystal obelisk ironically reminiscent of the anomaly he had discovered, the tourist approached with reluctance visible in his posture. He had prepared brief remarks, understanding the symbolic importance of his words while wishing he could return to the anonymity of his previous life. "I accept this recognition not for myself, but for those who had no choice in their connection to Project Substratum," he began, voice steady despite his discomfort with public speaking. "The researchers who died in 1967, whose families were denied the truth about their sacrifice, the community that lived under implicit threat for decades, The public lands that were violated contrary to our collective agreement about their protection. He paused, gathering his thoughts before continuing. What I found beneath that canyon was not just a scientific anomaly that defies our understanding of physics. I found a moral anomaly that defied our understanding of governance. The crystalline formation distorted space and time around it, but the secrecy surrounding it distorted something more fundamental: the relationship between a government and its citizens. The tourist looked up from his prepared notes, making eye contact with various officials seated before him. The reforms emerging from these revelations matter more than any individual recognition. Independent oversight of classified research. Environmental impact assessments regardless of security classification. Whistleblower protections with actual teeth. These changes will determine whether my actions ultimately mattered. He concluded with a simple statement that would be quoted extensively in subsequent coverage. Some secrets are too consequential to keep. Some truths too important to classify. What exists beneath that canyon belongs not to any agency or administration, but to humanity's collective understanding of our universe. After the ceremony, during the obligatory reception, the tourist found himself in conversation with various officials offering thanks, scientists expressing fascination with his documentation of the anomaly, and journalists seeking additional insights. He navigated these interactions with polite restraint, providing technical details about his investigation while avoiding the personal narrative that media outlets continually sought. In a quiet moment near a window overlooking the rose garden, he was approached by an elderly scientist he recognized from coverage of the International Review panel that had been granted access to the anomaly. "Your documentation was remarkably precise," the physicist noted. "The quantum fluctuation patterns you captured match exactly what our instruments recorded during formal analysis." "I was thorough," the tourist replied simply. "More than thorough. You recognized significance without specialized training." The scientist studied him with evident curiosity. "May I ask what went through your mind when you first observed the anomaly? Few have witnessed something that fundamentally challenges our understanding of reality." The tourist considered the question carefully, remembering the moment he had first gazed through the observation room window at the crystalline formation suspended in Containment Chamber Alpha. "Terror," he eventually answered, "not from the object itself, but from the recognition that something so profound had been hidden for decades, that we've built systems allowing such secrecy to persist unchallenged." The physicist nodded slowly. "Science thrives in light, withers in darkness. What you've done has implications beyond this specific discovery. You've forced a reckoning with secrecy itself." As the event concluded and the tourist prepared to depart, he felt the emotional weight of the past year, the fear during his infiltration of the facility, the vigilance during the evidence distribution, the uncertainty as investigations unfolded. The official recognition provided a form of closure, yet he understood that his connection to Project Substratum would define the remainder of his life in ways both visible and invisible. The accounting firm welcomed the tourist back with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. His colleagues had watched the congressional testimony and award ceremony, recognizing their formerly anonymous co-worker despite the partial identity concealment measures. His desk had remained untouched during his extended leave of absence, a silent acknowledgement of his eventual return. His first day back brought a stream of subtle nods and respectful distance from co-workers unsure how to interact with someone who had become accidentally significant. The division director, during their private meeting that morning, had offered both congratulations and concern. "The firm is proud of what you did," she stated carefully, "and we've ensured your position remained secure throughout. But I have to ask, are you truly ready to return to spreadsheets and tax codes after—" She gestured vaguely. "All of that?" It was a legitimate question. After uncovering one of the government's most significant secrets, after congressional testimony and White House ceremonies, did the meticulous review of financial documents still hold meaning? "This is where I belong," the tourist had replied with certainty that surprised even himself. What happened in Arizona was accident and circumstance. This work, finding patterns, identifying anomalies, bringing order to complex systems, this is who I am. Yet, as he resumed his professional routines, he found himself irrevocably changed. Financial irregularities that would have once commanded his full analytical attention now seemed trivial compared to the patterns he had uncovered beneath the canyon. Client concerns about tax exposure paled against memories of researchers who had died in the 1967 containment incident, their sacrifices concealed from families who deserved truth. His weekend expeditions to local wilderness areas continued, but with heightened awareness. Every unusual rock formation, every restricted area, every government installation glimpsed from hiking trails carried new potential significance. He found himself unconsciously analyzing helicopter flight patterns, noting unmarked vehicles, documenting inconsistencies between maps and terrain. His recreational pursuits now infused with investigative habits formed during the substratum revelation. 6 months after returning to work, the tourist requested vacation time for what colleagues assumed was another hiking expedition. Instead, he flew to Arizona, rented a vehicle using his real name for the first time since his initial discovery, and drove toward the canyon system that had changed everything. The landscape had transformed dramatically. What had once been restricted wilderness, accessible only through difficult backcountry navigation, now featured a monitored access road leading to a formal research campus. Security checkpoints remained, but now operated with transparent protocols under multi-agency oversight. Visitors with proper credentials could tour designated portions of the former secret facility, now rebranded as the Advanced Physics Research Center. The tourist presented his special access authorization, granted by the Congressional Oversight Committee in recognition of his role in the exposure, and was escorted through security protocols significantly more professional but less intimidating than those he had evaded during his infiltration. The former hidden entrance, once camouflaged within the canyon wall, had been expanded into a formal entry complex. Educational displays explained the facility's history, including a sanitized version of Project Substratum's origins and the subsequent reforms emerging from its public revelation. Scientists in standard laboratory attire replaced the armed guards who had previously secured the perimeter, though discreet security personnel maintained vigilance throughout the installation. His escort, a young researcher with the Department of Energy's newly established Transparency Division, led him through areas that had been declassified for limited public access. The upper levels have been completely restructured for collaborative research, she explained as they descended into the facility. International teams rotate through on 6-month appointments, ensuring no single government maintains exclusive access to the anomaly research. And Sublevel 7? The tourist asked, the designation still carrying emotional weight in his memory. Renamed Collaborative Research Level Alpha, she replied. Still restricted to cleared scientific personnel, but with multinational representation and independent oversight. The containment protocols have been completely redesigned with redundant safety systems. The tour concluded at a new observation deck constructed above the former Sublevel 7, providing a carefully controlled view of the continued research surrounding the crystalline anomaly. Through specialized shielding, visitors could safely observe the phenomenon that had triggered decades of secrecy and the subsequent accountability reforms. The tourist stood at the observation window, watching teams of scientists conducting measurements around the crystal formation that still defied complete explanation. The terror he had experienced during his first glimpse of the anomaly had been replaced by something more complex. Wonder at the phenomenon itself, satisfaction at the transparent research now surrounding it, and lingering concern about what else might remain hidden in similar facilities not yet exposed. When the formal tour concluded, he requested a moment alone at the canyon rim overlooking the research complex. His escort respected the significance of this return, withdrawing to a discreet distance while remaining visible. Standing at the edge of the canyon, the tourist gazed across the landscape that had once concealed such significant secrets. The harsh beauty of the desert remained unchanged, red rock formations catching the afternoon light, sparse vegetation clinging to crevices, the timeless geology contrasting with the temporary human structures now visible below. In that private moment, he acknowledged the incompleteness of the resolution. The crystalline anomaly remained partially unexplained despite international scientific attention. Some officials implicated in the cover-up had escaped accountability through legal maneuvering or political connections. The environmental damage to the canyon ecosystem would require decades of remediation. Yet something fundamental had changed. A system designed to operate without oversight had been exposed to sunlight. Reforms, however imperfect, had created pathways for accountability that hadn't existed before. Scientific knowledge that had been hoarded was now being cautiously shared. As the setting sun cast long shadows across the canyon walls, the tourist placed a small stone on the rim, a private memorial to those who had never returned from the facility's depths, whose stories had been classified rather than honored. In that gesture lay his recognition that while systems might be reformed, Individual losses remained irreversible. The early October sun crawled up behind the jagged ridges of the western Arizona canyon lands, painting the stratified rock walls in burnt orange and deep crimson, just as it had on that morning 2 years earlier, when an ordinary hiking expedition had led to extraordinary discovery. The tourist stood at a different overlook now, a designated viewing area rather than an unmapped backcountry location, but the desert's timeless beauty remained unchanged. Below, where once a hidden door had been camouflaged within stone, the research complex operated with transparent purpose, its activities no longer concealed from public awareness. Scientists from a dozen countries now studied the crystalline anomaly that had once been America's most closely guarded secret, their findings published in journals rather than classified in underground archives. The tourist adjusted his backpack straps, the familiar gesture connecting him to the person he had been before Project Substratum, a man who found peace in wilderness and wisdom in natural landscapes. That core identity remained, though now layered with experiences that had fundamentally altered his relationship with institutional authority and official narratives. 2 years of investigations, reforms, and accountability measures had not answered every question about what lay beneath the canyon. The crystalline anomaly still defied complete scientific explanation, its properties suggesting possibilities beyond conventional understanding of physics. Some records remained classified, some officials had escaped justice, some damage could never be undone. Yet as he prepared to depart this place for what he suspected would be the final time, the tourist found a measure of peace in the transformation he had helped create. Truth, like the desert sunlight now illuminating the canyon's depths, had a revealing quality that exposed what darkness had concealed. Systems designed for secrecy had been reformed for transparency. Knowledge hoarded had become knowledge shared. The tourist turned from the overlook and began walking toward the parking area where his vehicle waited. His hiking boots left imprints in the sandy soil, temporary marks that would eventually be erased by wind and weather, just as individual actions gradually faded into the broader patterns of history. What remained was the change those actions had created, the precedents established, the reforms implemented. As he reached his vehicle, he paused for one final glance back at the canyon, the place where he had screamed in terror upon discovering what lay beneath its ancient stones. The fear had given way to something else, a recognition that even the most carefully constructed secrecy could not permanently withstand the human impulse toward truth, the need to bring hidden things into light. The road stretched before him, leading away from Arizona's canyons toward whatever unknowable future awaited. Whatever lay ahead, he had fulfilled the responsibility that had found him through chance and circumstance, revealing what should never have been hidden, regardless of the personal cost. The tourist started his engine and merged onto the highway, becoming once again an anonymous traveler among many. Behind him, the research facility continued its work in the desert sunlight, no longer a government secret, but humanity's collective endeavor to understand a universe that still held mysteries beyond current comprehension. Don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling stories of ordinary people facing extraordinary discoveries, and the courage required when accidental revelation becomes moral obligation.